Hi, welcome to Hamilton and Hazen, Behind the Mic. Join author M.L. Hamilton and me, I'm narrator Kelley Hazen, as we discuss our latest audiobook. Born from our 7 years of collaboration and more than 60 audiobooks we've produced together, listen to the ins, the outs, the ups, and the downs, the inside track you love to follow, Behind the Mic.
Welcome to Behind the Mic number 12. How are you, Kelley?
I'm good, ML. How are you?
Good. So this one we're going to be talking about the conclusion to the Moonlight Trilogy, which is finally here. And this third book is called The Moon Mage. And we literally just finished recording and writing at the same time. So I'm going to turn over to you because you have the first question that we decided we were going to talk about.
Yeah, it literally, I just recorded the last component 30 minutes ago, which is the teaser for the follow-up series, right? The Fire Wielders trilogy, which will come out sometime in the future.
Yes.
But yeah, that was yeah, so literally hot off the, I mean, we haven't even sent this one out for quality assurance yet. So which we will do immediately following this. But yeah, so the first question, and actually I represent Bruce here, Bruce Carver, producer, engineer of Storyteller Productions. He the part about this whole process with, and this isn't the first time. In fact, you and I have been trying to perfect the whole getting the audiobook to release at the same time as the ebook and the print book. And it's challenging because, as I think we've talked about innumerable times, we don't have complete control of the timing. There's a X number of days that it goes back to ACX Audible where it goes through quality assurance. And I think our shortest book was like a day or something, 2 days. And then we had one that actually took months, and it got lost. It literally got lost, and they wouldn't believe us, and it was ugly. But anyway, so as we continue to try to perfect the timing of this thing, with the Moon Mage, we got into the situation where literally you were still writing while I was recording. And Bruce found that fascinating, that the ink was not dry on figuratively speaking, the ink was not dry on the page before you would send it off to me, and I would be recording it, and then awaiting the next group of chapters to move forward. So he just found that very exciting and very sort of daredevil, and thought it would be interesting for you/us to speak to that. So you go first.
So we've kind of done this a little bit, not quite as dramatically as this time it was. This time it was pretty dramatic. I was handing you chapters as they were being written, and you were reading them that night. And then I think if I'm not wrong, you were recording them the very next day.
Yep.
And usually I'm super anal, for lack of a better word, about handing chapters over before I've gone through it a million times. So I didn't start doing this until I knew I was halfway through the book, and I knew pretty much where the trajectory of the book was going. But it was an interesting process because I was literally writing, handing it off to you without going through those checks that I usually do, and trusting. And this is where our trust has built so much over the years, that I was trusting that if there was anything major, you were going to come back and say, hold on, and call a halt to it. So I think in that regard, it was kind of exciting because it was kind of free fall, and I was putting a lot of trust into you to kind of be a gatekeeper, since I wasn't able to be my own gatekeeper quite as much. And a couple times now, I've just said, what do you think? And turn it over to you. So in regards to where we're at, and where I think Bruce is finding it, is that it's truly becoming a very collaborative venture. You know, it used to be that there was very distinct separation between my role and your role, and now it's almost like it's becoming this dynamic enterprise where the two of us are working symbiotically together with it.
Yeah, I think entirely. I mean, there were moments when, and this happened a couple of times, uh, because of the nature of this, because I couldn't read the whole thing before I went in to record, because then it's funny because in the early on, depending upon who the writer was, I wouldn't bother to read it at all. I'd just record it cold. And but as you and I, have intensified our relationship and have begun to understand that this is going to be one of the most important relationships for together for each of us in our lives, in terms of in terms of everything, because you've become such a close friend. You've become a confidant, and you've become a touch. Oh, just a second. There we go. Okay. I was saying something
So
really important.
returning now to previously broadcast programming.
And it's always the studio end that screws up, isn't it? That must instill such confidence into potential clients that watch these. What are they doing over there? I always think of Elmer Fudd in the cartoons and the Looney Tunes cartoons. Turn up the power. But anyway, you've become a touchstone. I mean, I reach out knowing you now to be just on so many levels, as a parent and as a researcher in terms of your writing. I mean, I reach out to you for a lot of things. So yeah. But I would be in the middle of recording, and having not read the book because there was no rest of the book to read, I would have to ask you, okay, it's like, this is, is something like this going to happen again? Or is this the big one? So because, and that was one of the things that I touched on in my progress reports, is that, and it is part of what makes the urban fantasy in particular a wild ride, is that you don't write classic, and tell me to shut up if you don't agree, but you don't write classic urban fiction, or urban fantasy. It's within that genre, but you as a writer have established yourself by, and again, tell me to shut up if I'm wrong, but from my perspective, you always tackle much more the human experience. I think for me, when I read your books, that's almost always an overlying theme for you, is whatever the dynamic, how is this affecting these people as human beings or part human beings, or, whatever within then the context of the genre. So, yeah. And that was like, not that these books have a ton of special effects, they don't, but, they have just the right amount, but, that was one of the things. It's like, if we're going to juice this power that somebody's displaying, is this the last time they're going to display it? Is it? And depending upon the powers, it's like we never put a special effect on the fact that Cassius can run really fast, because he never, you never gave it a sound, right? Yeah. And it was only described in the narration, and there was no reason to put an effect on the narration. But when there is an opportunity, whether it's in somebody's speech or if they have a, like, abracadabra, like they say a key word, so it was stuff like that. Yeah. And it was very exciting. It was exciting. It was, which actually I'm going to ask you, unless you have more to put on this point, I'm going to go ahead and ask you my other question, because I think now is a good time for it. So how did that for you as a writer? It seemed like, as you pointed out, you would send the chapters. I would read them usually in the middle of the night, like I usually do. And then I would get up the next morning after and walk the dog and then record them, right? And then Bruce would edit them in the afternoon, and they'd be up for you to review by the evening. And then you would listen through the evening. And then, but it really did seem to have this, you wrote, I recorded, you listened, and then you wrote again. And it began to seem, it seemed to me that the listening for you seem to play more of an active role in the writing. And am I correct in that, or speak to that?
So
You need me.
I did. But I have the whole story planned out. So I knew exactly where the story was going to go and I knew how it was going to end. But what I think I've told you before is I've had this sudden epiphany ever since we started working together, that I read, and obviously reading has been my whole career as a teacher and everything, but I don't comprehend as well, or I don't get the nuances as well as I do auditorily. So I'm very much an auditory, in education, they talk about visual versus kinesthetic versus auditory learners. And I think I'm very much an auditory learner because before I write any of the books, I always go back and I don't reread the previous book. I listen to the audiobook of the previous book in order to get myself back into the characters and back into the setting and to remember the events that happen. And there's this very weird thing where I know I've written this book and I'll listen to the audio again and I'll suddenly discover something in the audiobook that I forgot that I had written. So it's, to me, the listening part of it, it just reinforces to me, and it's a better way for me to remember what happened. And I've become very dependent on that. It's just hearing that audio really reinforces to me what I've listened, and hearing the cadence of the language and hearing all of that stuff. And it's a much better way for me to pick up when I do silly things, like I put the same word in, twice in one sentence. I can pick that up much better on the audio than I do when I can read it 1,000 times and I don't pick it up, but I can hear it immediately. And I sent you a couple of times where I said, this was my mistake, and you had to go back and fix it, but it was my mistake in the book that I didn't see, even though I'd read it about 10 times, but I heard it in the audio and then I picked it up. So I think in that regard, this has been a boon for me doing the audiobooks in my own writing, because it plays into something that I didn't even realize was my learning style. The other part of it that I think is interesting is I am much more, and it would be so interesting to loop in somebody who actually reads the books and doesn't listen to them to see if this plays out. But I'm much more aware when I'm writing to put the writing in the cues into my writing to give you sort of a guide to how I want it to sound when you narrate. And I never did that before. And so I think that that's an interesting thing too, because you always pick up on those cues that I write with the right. If it's a dash, you pick up on that dash. If it's italics, you pick up on those italics. And I wonder, for the reader, does that give them a different experience than another writer who maybe doesn't have this close tie to an audiobook producer? Can they pick up on those cues the way that you do, when I give it to you?
Well, well, I know what I think, but I was taught, right? And I guess, and hopefully we were all taught this. Because it seems like a basic, that's another way you're my touchstone. I know when I'm writing and I get to one of those, I think I did that in a text to you. I was lying down, or was I laying down? Which is it, Michelle? But when I have a question, you're who I go to so that I don't make a grammatical error. But that being said, I was taught, right, that, those are the tools of a writer, colon, semicolon, hyphens, quotation marks, single quotation marks, and they all have, I don't want to call them hard and fast meanings, or rules, or, uses, but they also indicate that there's a change, if nothing else, right? You may not know the difference, or one may not know the difference between a semicolon and a colon, its purpose, but you sure know it's different than a period. It's different, right? And it indicates a change. So unless you're just thick as a brick, I would think you would have to go, oh, look, there's a funny scratch there. Maybe that means. And this actually brings us around to the third question, which we may or may not be ready for that. A lot of what I know about punctuation is how it's applied in acting, right? When you speak it, because I mean, the scripts are written, you know, the plays are written. It's a form of, it's dramatic literature, right?
Yeah.
And but literature nonetheless. And then it goes to an actor, and an actor has to interpret those markings. So arguably that is a good reason to use an actor as your narrator, as opposed to just somebody who's never acted before.
Yeah.
And you know, because of course you need a trained actor, you know, because you know, but anyway, I digress. um uh, Never more important, never more significant in any playwright's writing is punctuation than Shakespeare.
Yeah.
It has everything to do with when you breathe, how you breathe, when you pause, when you don't pause, what gets stressed, what doesn't get stressed, i.e. iambic pentameter, right? I mean, trying to keep some kind of meter going. And so, you know, so that's what that is. But yeah, I mean, I'm grateful to you that you include those nuances, just as because you do give me those breadcrumbs.
Mhm.
And at the same time, it's also not all on my shoulders to make sure that it doesn't just sound Johnny One Note, you know?
So, not giving anything away, if anybody's read the previous two Moon Thieves, you know that there's a running thing with, as you brought up, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, and it becomes very significant in this one. And you made some comments. You wrote some of the status updates about that, and it made me think, because I studied for 2 weeks in London at the Globe Theatre, and
Lucky.
yeah. And what that did for me is I went as an English teacher, and I had this. I remember we were in a debriefing session at the Globe, and they were asking us, each of us, what we took from it, and then they came to me, and I said, well, you know, it's funny what I've just suddenly had this epiphany while being here is I came here thinking I was coming as an English teacher and how I teach Shakespeare to my students. And what I realized being here, that I'm actually coming at it from a writer's perspective, and how he created a situation where ultimately Shakespeare was first and foremost an actor. That was his first and foremost role. And I suddenly realized that, well, yes, he wrote for people to watch it, but he also wrote for actors to act it. And as a writer, it was sort of an interesting experience to see how a writer would take what you write and then create this experience for the audience. And that was something that just hit me. And so when you were writing your status updates, I had this thought: we both have experience with Shakespeare. A lot of my I come to Shakespeare frequently in my writing, and a lot of my influences are from Shakespeare. And then I know that you shared that you were in Midsummer's yourself, that you had a role, because I saw the photo that you had posted on Facebook. If you haven't seen those, Kelley has the status updates on Facebook, and one of them was on Midsummer's Night's Dream.
The Tempest.
No, Tempest. It was a Tempest.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was a Tempest. Yeah.
Although I did too. Everybody
doesn't. Yeah, everybody needs Summers. But the Tempest, yeah, which is one that doesn't get. I don't think it gets acted as often as some of the other ones. And I was thinking about it. So we had this interesting conversation, you and I, about, I was saying we both come from this background and this experience with Shakespeare. And do you think that, what is it that you think that Shakespeare does? I know from a writer's perspective, it's just all of the wealth of his way of language. And you talked about like his insults and stuff like that in one of your status updates. And for me, that's it. It's that musicality of his writing, the iambic pentameter. It's the wealth of the characters. I mean, there's nobody that can draw a character with such depth and dimension than Shakespeare can. And I mentioned to you, I said, so how do you think that informs your acting? And you made a comment about that you didn't think it necessarily did, because Shakespearean roles are so difficult to come by, especially for a woman. And so I wanted you to speak to that, because I thought that was a really fascinating insight into sort of the actor's world. And if I've got any of that wrong, please, correct it.
No, I think you hit on it. The general nature of it. Yeah, I mean, what I know about Shakespeare, and I mean, it's one of those things where, and I can only speak from my experience, right? It's intimidating. It's kind of like David Mamet in that way. It's like when you first encounter Shakespeare and you're going to speak those words that have been around for, so long. And Mamet is, I mean, it's iconic. It's derivative, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, do I know how to do this? And the answer is probably yes. Right. I mean, and so there's all those trappings that go with it. And then once you experience a good teacher, and a lot of it is just learning to make sense of it.
Yes.
And which is to say that it's really just, and so in theater, in working on a Shakespeare play, probably the most essential part of the experience of the rehearsal process is they call it the table reading.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of theaters do it for every play. You sit down and you just read it with all your fellow actors, and the stage manager usually reads the stage directions, or those that are significant to the storytelling, not necessarily to the staging, right? Because any stage directions in a play are usually from the original production of it, and don't necessarily bear, he entered stage left, I mean, well, maybe in this one, he's going to come from the audience, or whatever. So it's the ones that affect the storytelling, at dawn, act one opens at dawn, those are the important ones. Anyway, the table work that you do with Shakespeare is essential.
Yes.
And because that's where you and the director make sense and make sure that you're on the same page, with the director's intention, with the director's thematic intention for this production, and then your intention as the actor, that you guys are copacetic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, and for me, I would just think about it and think about it and think about it and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it until I could say the same thing in my own vernacular, and then just translate it back into Shakespeare's words, and with the right beat, the right rhythm, the right breathing, the right, all that stuff. And when I can say it, then the character can say it and make it sound like an honest thought and not something like words strung together in a written sentence. So the table work, that's what's so important about Shakespeare. But yeah, I would have loved to have done way more Shakespeare than I ever got to do, because it's so heavy male oriented stuff, right? Wars and Richard III and King Lear and Prospero, and right. And there are some great women, there are some great female characters, but at the time, the older ones, I was too young to play. And now that's not where my focus is, unfortunately, but also there was a snobbishness about it in terms of who you have to be, what you have to be, what your training has to be in order to be allowed to play it. So it kind of, that thing of being intimidated by it as a young actor comes full circle in not getting to play it, because the people with the power, and whether it's to sell tickets or whether it's because they, whatever the reasoning is in terms of, only having experience or only having certain credentials, that say you can do Shakespeare. But, and the other point that I made to you is that now with all the gender fluidity, I mean, I remember when I was younger, there'd be a handful of all female Hamlet, and everybody would be like, oh God, yeah, we really want to go see that, and I mean, not me, but I mean, I knew a lot, there were a lot of productions like that were done, and it was very difficult. They didn't sell a lot of tickets at the time. But now in the advent of, gender fluidity and LGBTQ plus question mark, that we have there. I anticipate, if not already, a lot more opportunity to see those parts played by all kinds of people. I think the ceiling on that has busted wide open, and who knows what'll come of that. And I think that, one of the first productions of Shakespeare I ever saw, and again, it was at the same time, I think I was like probably 12 or 14, and I would go upstairs to watch TV, the little TV upstairs, and that's when I fell in love with NBA basketball. And I saw a masterpiece theater production of Much Ado About Nothing with Sam Waterston.
Oh,
And
really?
Young man. I hate myself that I can't remember the woman that played Beatrice, but it was set in like the Ascot races, like My Fair Lady, that time period, with the big hats and and everything. It was all black and white.
Yeah.
And it was the costuming. It was, oh my God. And I was riveted. I was absolutely riveted. And I think we have that opportunity now to take these stories, particularly with how crazy the world has been. I mean, whether it's the political crazy or the gender crazy, and I use crazy not in a negative, just turmoil, excitement, mixing it up, right? We have the war in Ukraine. I mean, we have an opportunity to take those wars and to take those just, there's wonderful opportunity to change the theme, to take this story and set it in a different place with different people playing those roles, and see how those words resonate for us today.
What I think you said something very interesting to me, which is just flies in the face of who Shakespeare himself was, is this idea, and I totally agree with you, that it became sort of this elite thing, like, you'd hear, well, he was a Shakespearean actor, like it was some, and Shakespeare was all about the common man being able to access theater. That was the whole idea of having the groundlings, where the common man could come in and mingle with the Queen of England in the same genre, in the same place, and being able to see a play and being able to understand a play and being able to get culture that way. And so that flies in the face, this idea that Shakespeare is somehow relegated to only, the top echelon of whatever, is just completely disregarding who Shakespeare himself was. And he was from humble beginnings. His father was a glove maker, so it's not like he came, I mean, his mother, yes, was titled, but his father was not. His father was a day laborer. And so this idea that somehow Shakespeare is only attainable for certain people, I agree with you. I hope that we see a resurgence. It's endured for over 400 years. I hope we see a resurgence of people reimagine it in new ways, because it is still pertinent. It is so pertinent to what's happening. I see so many parallels often to things, in Shakespeare, in what is happening in our daily world. But where it comes in with this book, was an interesting.
Next question. My next question. That was my question. So why? Go ahead.
So it comes in interesting with this one because it's the whole the Ides of March, and that's not giving anything away. But you and Bruce did some really interesting things with the audio for that, and highlighting that audio, and her imagining, actually, there's only one place where she says it herself, and that's towards the end. The other time she's imagining it being said, and in sort of a Shakespearean kind of play environment. And you guys did some really interesting stuff, and it's just literally 2 lines. And so do you want to talk about the choices, because they were inspired choices that you made for that? So what led to that inspiration?
Oh, well, the whole Ides of March. I mean, so is Julius Caesar's considered a history, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And just because Shakespeare's plays are broken up into what? The histories, the tragedies, the comedies, and the romances?
No, it's three. So it's history, tragedies, and comedies. There's three. And Julius Shakespeare, yes, although it kind of tracks more towards the tragedy. But it's an interesting play because a lot of it is men sitting on a stage together talking politics. It's not the most exciting of Shakespeare's plays. It's one that's very nuanced and to when you really, because we studied it extensively for the 2 weeks I was there, and it's certainly not one of my favorites. Because again, it's a bunch of men sitting on stage talking politics and drinking, and but
That's Congress.
yeah, exactly. And so it's but it also has some of the most memorable, the whole Mark Antony, I come here to bury Shakespeare, not to praise him, that whole speech, some of the most memorable, speeches, some soliloquies in there. So it's an interesting one. But yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's, I mean, I of all of them, I always wondered why Julius Caesar, except, it's like you can say that it's not the most active or the most interesting, and yet has some of Et tu, Brute, the Ides of March. I mean, you can take somebody who maybe isn't even completely clear on who Shakespeare is, and they've heard those two lines, they heard, and know what they mean,
Yeah.
But the idea of the Ides of March is just always, I mean, even just, you just say it and it sends chills up my spine. It always has. And so I just took that a step farther because, and again, it's just, I knew exactly why Brianna, intuitively, I share that when I'm in a situation that makes the hair on my arm stand up, I think of the Ides of March. I think of the idea of that. And so I knew I could connect intuitively to why Dr. Brianna Perry, the main character, conjures that in her head. And when those moments happen. And so that was and just to make that as haunting as possible. And I would just, I mean, I could hold up the notebook and show you where I would mark to Bruce, put the time code in, okay, at 9:20, from 9:24 to 9:28 in chapter 3, these are the words. And I would say the most haunting, shivering, chilly, scary, foreboding, all the words I can think of, and I just write them there for him. And then he takes that information, and that's how you wind up with the sound. So that's, that, and then, it's like the wind whistling through the trees, right? It's the scariest horror movie you ever saw. I mean, what is the thing that scares you to your bones? And then that was the feeling that I wanted from that, just haunted.
Yeah. And you know what, that brought up another thing that during the middle of the making, you sent me a text message and I hadn't even heard it yet, but you said Bruce intervened on one of the ones, and it was the Ollie Ollie Oxenfree. And he had strong opinions on it, and you wound up going with his take on it. And so again, what made you finally decide that he was right? And
he never says anything. I mean, he's such a soldier, and which may have come from a time when he did say something and I bit his head off, and so now he doesn't ever say anything. But no, I hope that's not the case. But he really he believes in me, and he believes in what I hear. And he only ever intervenes when he's really, really sure of something. And he's also got, as I mentioned in the status report or the progress report on Facebook, Kelley Hazen narrates at Storyteller Productions. He has big ears. That's what we call it in the recording industry. Somebody that's a really good listener on like all levels. And he can hear, and it's because of his musician work, right? He can hear the whole thing. And when he listened to the end of that chapter, as he was editing it, he heard what it could be if I did it a different way. And so he'll come upstairs, or he'll text me, or he'll call me, and he'll go, you need to change this. It needs to be like this. And when I had been recording it, I had done it 10, 15 different ways to get it just right, the way that I heard it. So I was disinclined to change it. But he was so sure of it, and he sang it to me, which Bruce never sings. He's not a singer. So if he believed in it enough to actually sing it to me, then I knew he felt strongly. And so I had to go with him on it. I actually asked him if he wanted to be a guest on Behind the Mic to talk about that, but he chose to help the neighbors go pick up cabinets at Lowe's in our pickup truck. So, so he can't be with us today.
Yeah.
But one of the points I did make was that in the same progress report that we're alluding to that talks about Shakespeare, is that this is the third book that, if I'm remembering correctly, Werewolves in London, we dealt with the Scottish play Macbeth, and I had a chance to say that wonderful King Macbeth soliloquy. I was going to say King Lear, Macbeth, and then also the Avery Nolan adventures were all named for. And how
That one's Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh, really?
No, sorry. Gosh, why do I keep doing this? No, that's Midsummer's Night's Dream. Yeah, that's all Midsummer's Night's Dream.
What prompted those references? Just, I think you told me that you had just come from your summer at the Globe when you wrote Werewolves, didn't you?
Yeah, I had been at the Globe for 2 weeks. Now, like I said, we did Julius Caesar when I was at the Globe, but I teach Macbeth every year, and I have grown to greatly appreciate that play over the years of reading it and seeing every time I read it, I see something more in it. And so instead of doing Julius Caesar there, I wanted to do Macbeth, because that soliloquy you mentioned is one of my favorites. It's so haunting, and it's the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps forward in this petty pace, and it's so desolate and so
Dark Night of the Soul.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it's still, like I said, just thinking about it gives me shivers. So I really wanted to incorporate that, because I think that that's just some beautiful writing in all of it. Writing can be joyful, but it can also be just, touch on those universal truths that, that dark moment, like you said. And then with Avery, I wanted to do A Midsummer's Night's Dream. To me, is so interesting because it's such an interesting Shakespearean play, because it's about fairies and, and just that whole fantasy. And it seemed like a perfect avenue for a fantasy story, which Avery becomes, and sort of that ethereal. To me, it's always been such an ethereal play. So that was just attractive, and it's nice because I tend towards the tragedies more. So I kind of wanted to see if I could incorporate a comedy. And then Julius Caesar, because we had studied it so extensively, and just as you said, I know what you mean about I don't have any experience as an actress. That was the only time I ever did any kind of anything at all. But that experience of doing the table round, of reading it and dissecting we literally dissected the language. We would do physical movements to the language to feel the cadence of it. We, at one point before we acted our scene on the Globe stage, we actually sang it. And that was just, and I'm not a singer either. I'm with Bruce. I can't carry a note if you put it in a bag. But we sang it just to feel the cadence of the language. And so Julius Caesar, to me, it just seemed to, I love the name Cassius. And I thought that character was interesting. I get, which, I get caught up on these peripheral characters, even more so than the main. And in that play, Cassius is such an interesting character because he is very much an instigator, and he very much pushes Brutus to do what he does. But at the same time, he's also intelligent and thoughtful so he's just this dichotomy of menacing and a man who really believes this is what's best for his country. And so he's caught in this sort of, I mean, he's an assassin, he's a base assassin, and yet he's more complicated than that. And I think that character tends to kind of get washed out because you've got Caesar, you've got Mark Antony, and you've got Brutus. And I think that the character of Cassius kind of gets lost. And so I was very intrigued by the idea of Cassius. And so that's where I brought him into the series, because the Cassius in the books kind of has that dichotomy. You know, he can be, Brianna talks often about, he almost terrifies her sometimes with his intensity, but at the same time, you know, he's the steadfast one. He's the one that's always there when he needs to be. And he has his strong feelings about what's right and wrong. I thought the one scene I loved exploring was the discussion between him and Derek about the death penalty. Because Cassius is so certain he knows, where Derek is more nuanced with it. And I think that plays more to the Cassius from Julius Caesar too, is Cassius and Julius Caesar is certain that this is, but then at the end, he has a tragic ending, you know, he commits suicide. So I think that's why Julius Caesar, because it was just that one character to me. And it's like when you mentioned the female characters, Macbeth is fascinating, but he's not the most fascinating character to me. Lady Macbeth is the most fascinating character to me.
Oh yeah.
So it's you know, it always seems to me those peripheral characters just really draw me to them. As fun as it is to write Brianna, I love writing Amber. You know, Amber was much more, to me, in some ways, more interesting than Brianna.
It's the peripherals that become the catalyst.
Yeah.
In most cases, it's something they do or don't do or don't say that causes the action to move forward, that then the hero or the heroine or the leading characters move in and have to deal with and resolve. And but it's almost always from the periphery that the curveball's thrown, you know. And so yeah, no, I get those are, you know, they say, you know, for the longest time I always played leading ladies, and if you break, you know, it's archaic, but if you break female roles down into leading lady, character woman, and ingenue, those are kind of the three, right? Which is leading lady, you know, middle to later age, old age, youth, right? And but the best leading ladies are lovely, right? But the real meat are those character roles, and which are often the secondaries or the peripherals. Yeah, no, I get you 100%. So what's next for us?
So next for us is going to be then our next Zion Sawyer. It'll be our 8th Zion Sawyer, and we'll be back in Sequoia for Christmas. And then planning, and then that's also they'll be in the midst of planning Rebecca and David's wedding. So it should be quite some fireworks going off there.
Now, are we going to do I know it's early to talk about it, because we try to have a release once a month, every other month. What do we shoot for?
Yeah, we were shooting for once a month, and then life got in the way. As my dog is barking in the background.
And are we going to do a Christmas mystery this year?
We will be doing, so we have All Hallows coming, which is the Peyton Brooks early mystery. That should be hopefully here in time for Halloween. And then we will have a Christmas mystery, the second one, and it's Finding Freedom.
And will that still star our same heroine from?
Yeah, it will be Everly and Isaac.
Cool. This is fun. We're having fun. And of course, our second, we look to get out the Scions of Eldon.
The Scions of Eldon, yes, that's coming too. Yeah.
Followed by the second box set for.
So we should have the second. So we should have the Moonlight Trilogy box set. We've scheduled it for Thanksgiving. We're going to come out with the Moonlight Trilogy on Thanksgiving as a gift for our listeners. And then we will do the box set for the first, for the second 3 of the Star of Eldon, Spirit of Eldon, and the Sanctuary of Eldon. We'll come out with a box set for that as soon as we are ready to release scions.
We got our hands full.
Yeah, we got a lot going on.
We got work to do.
Yes, we do. So let's go get to it.
Okay.
All right.
Ready to record.
All right. Thank you, Kelley. And this will be it for our last, our next, our 11th, 12th behind the mic. See you guys soon.
Thank you for joining us for Hamilton and Hazen Behind the Mic. Visit authormlhamilton.net and kelleyhazennarrates.com to join our newsletters for more insider news and views. Today's episode is sponsored by Phoenix Publication Services. PPS, Digital Shepherds. Let us ignite your writing goals.